Welcome, Jet fans, to another episode of Jets Life podcast, and here we are, um, week 14, and the Jets still only had one victory Monday all season long. Three victories on the season. Obviously, we know two of those coming on Thursday night games against Houston and the Patriots, and then the only victory Monday we were able to celebrate was after the Tennessee game. Another loss. This one kind of just continuing the trend of improbable. Really just don't understand. Everything goes right in these kind of games, and just nothing kind of falls in the direction that the Jets needed to. Offense came out. I remember last week kind of going at this team and saying the offense has yet to have a game where they start and finish, in a trajectory of just having a consistent game plan, consistent game overall. This was the game that happened. The Jets offense had two punts on the entire game, I believe it was. That's a winning formula. But when your defense is doing awful, when your defense allows 375 yards in the game, when your defense forces zero turnovers, when your defense does not record a single sack in the game, these are the recipe for disaster. And I understand the Jets were kind of riddled with injuries. CJ Mosley's been out for most of the year, and he's been put on IR as of this past week. So obviously the injury there. Sauce Gardner not being here, going up against the Dolphins receiving tandem of Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle was obviously something to be concerned with. DJ Reed out there kind of handling both of those receivers in given opportunities. Brandon Eccles did have, a good game for what he is at this point in his career. A player that probably gets another opportunity with the Jets too. But this is more than just the players on the field. This is about the coaching. Again, understandable. We're on an interim head coach, interim defensive-minded head coach. Um, we have Chris in the chat. What's up, Chris? Thank you for joining. Appreciate you joining in today. But this is a team that the defense is has been a problem since Salah was fired. You can blame it on the Jets not kind of giving Salah a little more time to work with, but that's neither here nor there. At some point in time, he was going to be let go. It was probably done way too early in the season. Would have liked to see, as I mentioned in previous podcasts, would have liked to have seen Salah operate in a situation where he was given a little opportunity to work with um, with a new offensive play caller instead of having to deal with Hackett's kind of old school type of offense. But nonetheless, we weren't given that opportunity. We're put in a situation here where we knew what was going to happen eventually. Salah would be eventually fired. Douglas would be eventually fired, and all that has happened to this point in time. So a game like this, you just look at, and the defense is just not what it should be. Does it come down to coaching? 100% of that's kind of what's going on here. Um, you know, Ulbrich is in over his head. I mean, he should not be the defensive coordinator and interim head coach. Really, kind of what I would have expected after the Salah firing would have been giving Ulbrich the interim head coach title, and then promoting either White Cotton or Tony Oden, one of those two guys, to be your defensive coordinator, and see where the season goes. But unfortunately, the Jets did not do that. They're stuck in a situation here where it just one loss after another. Maybe this week, we all understand the game coming up this next week is against the Jaguars. It's a winnable game, probably the last winnable game you really look at. And I mean, we saw what the Jets did against the Dolphins this past week. So that was on the road. Dolphins traveling up in the cold. We all understand Dolphins struggles under McDaniel in cold weather climates. So maybe that's a situation where the Jets can steal a win. But it's just upsetting. Again, I mean, no matter what this team does on offense, the defense will match that, whether it be offense playing terribly, the defense will play a little strong, just not strong enough to withhold opponents. And when the offense plays well, we've seen it multiple times against Indianapolis, now against the Dolphins, and against the Seahawks until the offense just kind of forgot how to play football in the second half. It's just one week after another of the same exact thing. And like I said, I think we win against Jacksonville. I think that's a game we should win. Going up against Mac Jones, we saw a Tennessee versus Jacksonville like game. I mean, I wasn't tuned into it obviously with the level of play that was there, but that's going to be more or less what you're going to see out of Jacksonville. Tennessee has a little bit of a stronger defense. I wouldn't say that they're top notch, but they are a pretty strong defense overall. So I could see where the points might go a little bit more in favor of Jacksonville. But um, I don't know. It would just be absolutely ridiculous if the Jets go into that game and don't win it. But then again, the Jets have done a lot in the season that would make us believe it's ridiculous. But again, just overall incompetent game for the Jets, allowing a lot of first downs. They did a lot. I mean, we went through the entire first half without a single punt for either side. Jets offense did their thing. Dolphins offense did their thing. Um, I mean, it just goes to show where this Jets defense is at, and then allowing 28 first downs. That overtime possession. Um, it's very unfortunate that this defense just has dropped off so far from what we once were. Um, Top five defense, a defense that looked like it had the ability with a legitimate offense to be, one of those Super Bowl caliber type of defenses. And boy, were we fooled. This is just despicable. It's week after week, and you know, obviously this game coming up next week, really their chance to kind of turn things around potentially. I mean, I know we're late in the season. I know we're officially have been eliminated from the playoffs. If you had any glimmer of hope, that glimmer of hope has been, dissolved at this point in time after that loss to the Dolphins, that overtime loss. But yeah, it's just unbelievable. 375 yards of offense allowed, 28 first downs allowed. I'm just going through the stats here. The penalties are just, that's a coaching statistic in my mind. 10 penalties on the game. Just completely unfortunate. And like I said, this offense did, what we kind of hoped that they would do. They scored 26 points. Yes, obviously, it's not what the Rams and Bills did. But the Jets offense scored 26 points in regulation. Never got an opportunity to touch the football in overtime because the defense just allowed Miami to scorch all the way down the field. With John Smith getting his three catches in the entire game in overtime, including the game-winning touchdown. Overall, just completely unacceptable. I don't see a situation here where really much of this defensive staff kind of sticks around with the new coaching staff. I think that entire side of the football, maybe they keep a guy like Tony Oden who's done an outstanding job with the secondary. Safeties have kind of always been a problem from a talent acquisition standpoint. So I think that's an area that Jets can definitely upgrade at. But yeah, just very unfortunate to watch this team just kind of fizzle on defense in a game where the offense played one of its best games of the season. And I guess let's go into that a little bit here. Aaron Rodgers getting his first 300-yard passing game as a member of the New York Jets. Garrett Wilson, Devontae Adams, both going over 100 yards on the game. That's a tandem I would love to see the Jets bring back for next year. Obviously, we understand the Devontae Adams situation. I assume he's probably not in favor of returning if Aaron Rodgers is not on the roster next year. So there's that obvious issue there, but there's a lot of cap savings as a result of potentially releasing Devontae Adams at the end of the season. But let me know what you guys think in the chat. I mean, is this a situation where you think that Devontae Adams could return to the Jets without Aaron Rodgers? I think we all understand the reason he came here and the reason he only restructured his contract in a way of generating that trade is probably in favor of being potentially released or cut after the season. But let me know what you think. Can the Jets restructure this contract? It would be very interesting off season. One of the first jobs on task for whoever the new general manager and head coach are to make a decision on Devontae Adams. But again, this Jets offense, overall strong performance. As I mentioned earlier, it just, wasn't enough. And, the offense is not completely absolved of fault in this situation. I think we look at, you know, being up by 8 in the fourth quarter with the ball in your hands. That's a situation where you just want to drive down the field a little bit, burn some clock, and eventually, hopefully, get a field goal in that situation. They were forced to punt after a sack in that situation. Let's A major need for the Jets going into the offseason is going to be right tackle. There's not a right tackle on the roster right now, unless his name is Morgan Moses. He needs to be re-signed, in my opinion. And if not, they need to bring in somebody really viable. I think that's the weak spot on this offensive line going into next season. Fashanu has been outstanding at left tackle. The interior offensive line looks solid, but as soon as that right tackle spot gets compromised, and we've seen it a few times here with Morgan Moses missing time, whoever comes in behind him is just not to his level. Morgan Moses is outstanding. He's been every bit of what we needed him to be going into the season. I think if you had told me Morgan Moses would perform the way he is performing and Tyron Smith just operating the way we expected him to, I think you're talking about a strong offensive line for a long season. But unfortunately, Tyron Smith was an utter disaster from a free agent signing. But Ola Fashanu should have been starting a lot sooner in the season than he was. You look at this offense, and it did what it was supposed to do, score the points. But you know, that final drive, we all look at that last play to Devontae Adams. If he just falls on the floor right there after making that catch, and I know he had some statements after the game with the referees not blowing the whistle, allowing time to like kind of for him to either fall on the ground or whatever the case may be, to instead of just calling the play dead in the field of play. Um, we're talking about a different situation here. At that point in time, I think there was like 50 seconds left in the game. If you would just fall into the floor, you'd expect 40 seconds to run off. And then at that point in time, Dolphins had no timeouts, obviously. That's why you would get down to 12 seconds, kick the field goal. You're talking about roughly 8 seconds left. And I don't know the Dolphins are marching down the field in those 8 seconds. They had plenty of time to operate, especially at that long kick return. Um, the long kickoff return after the field goal was made to get them basically to midfield. They didn't have much to operate with. They only needed about 15, 20 yards to get into Sanders' field goal range, and they did exactly that. We're talking about a completely different situation here, though. If Devontae Adams is able to just fall down on the floor, talking about a different situation if the Jets just run the football on first, second, and third down after getting that first down. Instead, they do that weird swing pass on first down to lose a few yards. Um, Second down, I believe, was a sack. It's just inexplicable play calling in that particular situation when you were in position to win. There's no reason why the Jets should not have won the game when they had first and 10 at that point in the field. Should have been just run the middle, third down, run just to get your field goal kicker in the position of the field that he wants to be at, drain down that clock to as little as possible, and then we're talking about, a victory Monday. But unfortunately, and depending on where you land on that side of the conversation, I know there's a lot of Jet fans who are in favor of the Jets losing because of draft implications, obviously. But then you have some portion of the fan base who, wants his team to continue winning. Very interested in whoever's in the chat. Just let me know where you fall on that side of the coin. But I'm one to not really ever root for my team to lose, but I'm also one to understand that if my team loses, especially when the season is over already, there's obvious implications that could benefit us moving forward, whether or not we're in position to draft a quarterback or whatever have you. But right now, the Jets get that loss. And if you haven't seen already through Tankathon, the Jets did drop in the draft somehow. I think it's aided by a lot of the results that happened ahead of us. Tennessee was originally behind us in draft order, but after that, after their loss and after our loss, that strength of schedule tiebreaker, I think we're slotted right now with the same strength of schedule. So they're in a very weak division. Obviously, Jacksonville's in their division. Jacksonville's up in that same tier that we're at. Houston is a good team, but they're not necessarily where teams like in our division with the Bills with a strong record. So obviously, when you look just at that point of view right there, you can see why we're kind of slotted in a situation where strength of schedule is going to definitely be a major issue there. But I expect obviously either Tennessee or Jacksonville will win another game this season. Actually, it might be beneficial if that game ended in a tie because both would actually kind of move below us because they'd have a better record if the Jets continue to lose and lose out. I don't necessarily see that being the case. I said it all along. I think the Jets find a way to win two more games this season. Jacksonville is the one I'm primarily looking at. Um, for a little while, I was looking at the Rams game being a potential one back to watching what the Rams did last night. That's you know I can't see it happening, obviously, any given Sunday, but that's a well coached team, strong offense. I just cannot see a situation where McVay gets kind of pushed around by Ulbrich and his defensive play calling. So the only winnable game you can really look at for sure is the Jacksonville game, and then you look at that Miami game. Does that cold weather impact in Week 18 maybe shift in our favor again when we just played a game that pushed to overtime against them, a game that we should have won. On the road in Miami, that should have been a victory, but unfortunately, like I said, situational football was just not there for us. Um, and Miami scores, 17-3 in the last fourth quarter and overtime combined. It's just not a winning formula. The Jets have got to learn how to close out these games, especially when the ball's in their hands and an 8-point lead. Just unacceptable for you to lose that game when you have the ball in the fourth quarter with an 8-point lead. Um, yeah, so just going down the line here, I mean, the defense just atrocious. I mean, I know I've mentioned it already earlier in this podcast. It's got to get better, and I know we look at these GM and head coaching candidates, and you know, there's a lot of opinions out there of what the Jets should do. Should they go out there for an offensive play caller? Should they go out there for a guy like Aaron Glenn, Mike Vrabel, guys with a defensive pedigree? My honest opinion on this situation and where the Jets are at right now, they just need a true leader. I don't care what side of the ball he's on, offense, defense. I obviously understand the complexities of getting a defensive minded guy is eventually, if he comes in with a strong offensive coordinator, it's fun for a couple of years, but then you play that game of offensive coordinator roulette because that guy likely gets poached. But that's a good problem to have. It's a great problem to have from an infrastructure and all that included. I know you can travel back in time and say, we should have gotten a better offensive coordinator, the Adam Gase year. We should have gotten a offensive-minded guy in the Robert Saleh years. And yes, the results obviously could be better than they were. I don't think it's saying much at this point in time. But if you just hired the correct leader at that point in time, and that correct leader brought in the right offensive minded guy, you're talking about winning football for a couple years. And I know it's a short sighted thing, but it's still much better than what we've had to handle as Jet fans. We're sitting here in offensive purgatory. We have a elite wide receiver in Garrett Wilson who is being limited because of the quarterback play that's surrounded him in his first 3 seasons of his career. He's on pace for to go well over 1,000 yards. I think it's going to be around close to 11 to 1,200 yards, somewhere in that range, depending on how he finishes out these last 4 games of the year. Um, he's on target to just. I mean, I think he's already um, amassed the most receiving yards in his first 3 years as a Jets receiver. He's been the best receiver we've drafted in a very, very, very long time, and we're seeing glimpses of greatness, but that greatness is being so limited by the fact that he's just not being thrown to in the right opportunities. We saw a situation late in the game in that last final drive where Rodgers took a sack. Garrett Wilson was wide open in the middle of the field. He was wide open. I agree. I think that maybe the trajectory of his route was kind of going towards the defender, and maybe that's why Rodgers didn't throw the football to him. Maybe he needs to flatten his route down a little bit more, kind of work his way towards more of a dig route instead of a post route like he was going. Regardless, a wide receiver that's that damn wide open in the middle of the field, we're talking about a situation. Rodgers hits him, and one, he's either running into the end zone because there's only one guy to beat, and Dolphins had troubles tackling this guy most of the game. He's either running into the end zone for a touchdown, or two, he's getting tackled inside the 10, inside the 5, and the Jets are again in position to just run down the clock down to zeros, and kick the game-winning field goal. It's a miss by Rodgers. The Devontae Adams miss on not getting the ball, not getting tackled inside the field of play and kind of working his way out of bounds. Those little plays that result in so much more in the grand scheme of things. And I'm not sitting here saying that Devontae Adams or Aaron Rodgers or these guys don't understand the situational football of things, but when you're a team starving for victory and your team starving for all these young players who just don't understand what winning is, it's so unfortunate that we actually have a pretty talented young offensive line. We actually have a pretty talented, you know, wide receiver and running skill players, young skill players out there, and they just don't understand what the hell what winning is. They don't understand the closing out of these football games, and we saw it pretty. I mean, they were learning on the fly in 2022. They were learning what it means to win football games. You make a major change at offensive play caller, and everything has kind of dwindled out of sight, out of mind. It kind of makes us all go back to the Lafleur situation, and his offense had its problems, obviously, but I think the biggest problem with his offenses was the obvious Zach Wilson problem that we had, and it's unfortunate that you know for whatever reason he had a bad rap with some of these players. Elijah Moore, obviously, that whole thing with him, like kind of screaming at him, cursing him out, and then eventually getting benched. So there was obviously a rift between Lafleur and some of these players. Potentially even with Zach Wilson, there's been some reports out there about a little bit of animosity between Zach Wilson and Lafleur. Whatever happens, you make a change, and I feel like it's been a little bit for the worst for some of these offensive players. Brees Hall is still, in my eyes, a great running back, but his trajectory from what I expected after his rookie year has kind of taken a little bit of a turn for the South. I mean, he had a great finish to the season last year, getting close to 1,000 yards. We all understand the Jets mathematician didn't understand what 1,000 yards is, and obviously, Brees Hall fell a little short because of that. But it's just one week after another. I look forward to this Jacksonville game as far as a winnable game, but I just like in the back of my head just keep telling myself, how in the hell is this team just going to screw it up again? How it's just that's the one thing in the back of my head is how are they going to screw it up? What are they going to do? How are they going to figure out a way to lose this game? Is basically what's running through my head because I mean, I definitely saw the loss against Indianapolis. There was a lot of people in favor of the Jets winning that game, but I was kind of at the forefront of that. I thought that was going to be a loss. Thought the Seattle game was going to be a loss, which many of us did. And the Jets actually kind of shocked me with their play in that game, coming out to a 14-0 lead, 21-7 lead. But then obviously the wheels fell off, and we understand what happened there. This game I projected to be a little bit more of a blowout. I think I last projected 27-14. I think on my last show was I believe my projection. I forget entirely, but I know I kind of bounced between being a touchdown game to a two touchdown game, and um, it ended up being the 6 point overtime win for the Dolphins. This Jacksonville game, I just don't know. And if I'm sitting here thinking it's going to be a blowout, I mean that's just not. I just feel like it's going to be a situation where, for whatever reason, it comes down to a last second fourth quarter drive, and but again, I think that's you know kind of the pessimist in me right now, just because of everything we've kind of experienced throughout this season. I think it ends up resulting in a win, and we'll see what happens there. I'll dive more into my predictions, some of the matchups in this game on my show on Friday. But yeah, it's just so unfortunate. I mean, this fan base deserves so much better than this. It's so sad that it's just so difficult for this team to finish games and win games, especially against the Dolphins, one of the teams I just despise and have despised growing up for the longest time. Being in Florida, especially, it's you're surrounded by Dolphin fans, and it's just completely unfortunate. Um, but outside of that, I mean, the kicking game, it's awesome to have a good kicker. I mean, I know we're in that point here where Carlson has been pretty solid from a kicking perspective, hitting that game, quote unquote, winning, take the lead field goal late in the half. This is a major problem for the Jets and has been for a few years. Zerline kind of stabilized it for a couple of years, but then this season was a complete disaster. But the Jets have been performing solidly with Andres Carlson there. Had a big 50-yard field goal in the last game as well. So maybe the Jets found something there with Carlson that they can work with. But this team has got to be kind of gutted from the inside out. It's really got to be cleaned out. And who that GM is that's going to come in here and kind of stabilize things at the top, you got some work cut out for you. There's talent here. There's a lot of it. You know, I mentioned earlier the offensive line has its players. The defensive line needs to be rehauled. But when you look at this entire roster as a whole, there's a lot of areas where the Jets need to upgrade. Um, but yeah, this is just one of those games. I mean, you look at it, and if you are just box score watching, you would look at this game and say that Jets did their job. They over 400 yards of offense. Rodgers going over 300 yards, two receivers going over 100 yards. Would have liked to have seen the rushing game be a little bit more prominent. That's the issue I think where you kind of really like identify with the Jets. Is they're just not running. They're not. They're abandoning the run like way too soon. It appears, and I understand a lot of it's just kind of early down runs and just not enough yardage on first and second down. Obviously, that puts you in a situation where you kind of have to dictate your game plan a little differently with short yardage passes to kind of manipulate like what a running game should be. Um, but yeah, it's the Jets have no push up front in the run game, and I mean obviously I kind of gave the offensive line some praise, but I think when you look at a team that that can or can't run the football, the first thing you kind of identify is the offensive line coach, or what they now call a run game coordinator in some of these situations. Keith Carter has been a problem since he's been here. There's been an outroar from players, Kai Becton obviously being one that kind of put some comments out there against the offensive line coach. That's a major concern, and the fact that this coaching staff didn't identify that as a flaw last season and decide to run it back with him. Um, it kind of speaks volumes to what the coaching staff was last season, and a major issue as to why Salah was gone pretty early in the season. Um, but yeah, Keith Carter's definitely a guy that I just don't understand it. The passing situations, the offensive line looks pretty solid for the most part. They hold up in these situations. It's when I feel like where things get a little shaky is when either the secondary is covering well or Rodgers kind of hold on to the ball for too long. Um, those are the situations where I feel like Rodgers just kind of makes it a I mean, he's not the mobile guy he once was. I think in a previous life, when he was with the Packers, he'd be able to kind of manipulate and get out of the pocket and extend the play to that second play. It's just not there for him right now with his lack of mobility. It's just not the game that he can play anymore, at least until he gets healthy. I mean, who knows? Maybe after an off season removed from his Achilles surgery, maybe he has a little more time to kind of heal up his legs and gain some of that mobility back. But he's going to be 42 next year. Um, the Jets need somebody back there who can kind of extend some plays. This offensive line is not as bad of a problem as some kind of projected to be. The problem on the offensive line right now is the right tackle spot. If Morgan Moses can't play, that's a major flaw. Max Mitchell is a major downgrade at that position, and obviously, in week 14, week 15, you're not finding a replacement offensive tackle, so you're kind of stuck with whatever you get there. But when he's in the game, they've got to put somebody over there to kind of help in pass protection, whether it be a tight end to chip, a running back in the backfield to kind of give that additional pass protection. But then you're losing a guy in the route. So again, Mitchell's a major a major downgrade from what Morgan Moses is. Morgan Moses with one hand is better than Max Mitchell at this point in his career. But yeah, a situation where the Jets need to upgrade on the offensive line. But yeah, really outside of that, it's you just look at this game and you look at the penalties, 10 penalties for over 80 yards, and just a situational lack of awareness, in a situation to win the game and you're passing in multiple downs and running pitch plays in the backfield that just get blown up. You need better play calling in those situations. Unless the Jets are in tank mode and we just don't know it. But those play calls kind of reek of, you know, a tank type of situation. I understand the coaches and players aren't tanking specifically, but um, the defense is just it's alarming how bad this defense is when you just look at it. They're the defense we walked into the season believing it would be top 5, top 10 at the worst, and we're giving up 30 points way too frequently in these games. And I know we've played some good offenses this season. Not gonna sit here and act like we've played terrible teams all year. But when you look at what this defense has done, for the most part, um, 49ers, we allowed 30 points. Steelers, we allowed 30 points. Against the Patriots, without Drake May playing most of the game, we allowed 25 points. Cardinals, we allowed 30 points. Colts, we allowed 28 points. And then obviously the Seahawks, 26 points. Dolphins, 32 points. In the Seahawks game, I mean, that offense was sleeping for the first half of the game. It's unfortunate. This defense is just terrible. And we got 3 games left coming up in these last 4 games that are against solid offenses. That Bills game is just going to be despicable. We play the Bills and Rams in back-to-back weeks. We just saw what those 2 offenses did to one another, and the Bills have a stronger defense than we got. At least when you look at what the Bills have done over the duration of the season, they're just a battle-tested defense. We are not that at all. But nonetheless, 4 games left. Jet fans, we'll get through it. 4 games, and then that next phase for us starts where we're back to where we once were. And luckily, we have a head start this time around on the GM head coach search. Typically, under Willie Johnson, it's been a situation where they, allow the coaches and the GMs to finish up the season. It was the first time under Willie Johnson that the Jets have fired a head coach and a GM in the middle of the season. So there's a head start there. They've already hired, obviously, we all know, 33rd team to aid in that GM and head coach searching. So maybe it's a situation where the Jets kind of get ahead of the 8 ball a little bit. They have the interviews lined up as soon as possible after the season ends. Um, but yeah, it's a situation the Jets can definitely take advantage of because of where they're at from the standpoint of just being ahead of the 8 ball a little bit here. But 4 games to go, guys. We can get through this. We all suffered through the tank for Trevor year. So it's nothing compared to that season. I know it was a season filled with hype, but that season, I know it was a long time ago, and this is we're all in the moment. But that season was just miserable. If you're a Jet fan, I despised every moment of that season, especially late in the season when we were so close to securing the top overall pick to win a couple of games, a couple of meaningless games late down the stretch. Obviously, we all understand why that season where things have fallen off. Trevor isn't the generational talent that many thought he was going to be, but he was still miles better than Zach Wilson. Nonetheless, I'll be back on here on Friday, and then obviously we have our AFC East show on Saturday. This week, I believe we are on Curtis's channel. Ace per head is where we're going to do our AFC East shakedown this week. So just keep an eye on me on Twitter. I'll definitely post an update as to where that's going to go. But yeah, 4 games left, guys. We can get through this. We'll get through this together. If you haven't already, please hit the like button. Subscribe to my channel. That's how I'll grow. I appreciate all the support. And like I said, we're almost there, guys. Let's go Jets.